Mediopolis, Chapter 10, Learning Shows. The squabble of children were watching all the children's programs. It was one of their silent films. So each of the children had to do the voices. They each took on the role of performing the different voices of the cartoon characters that were being shown. They were reading from a script, an audio cue. The length of the passage that they read varied according to their abilities. The younger children only had a few of the catchphrases to call out sometimes, or sounds perhaps even just to shout out, or cry out sometimes, at the right moment and the right time. It was all about getting it in sync, in rhythm. If you missed the line, then the cartoon character would go on pause in anticipation until it was spoken by someone else. Often some of the other children would all call out the reminder if one of the younger children had forgotten one of their lines, or couldn't read the autocue if it was an older child. And on the game, or the test as it also was, as it went on, the middle-aged children had often longer sentences on the autocue to read out. They were often challenging words, difficult to pronounce sometimes, real tongue twisters, or they were difficult sounds to say, and there were sometimes difficult words to learn the meaning of too. No words would appear, however, for the much elder children. No, they didn't have an autocue themselves. They were apparently expected to know their lines by heart or to have total recall. Somehow they had to remember what they had to say in their head without having anything written to rely upon. And that's what their learning program was about. Watching the reading, the elder father, who was the visitor, said he was enjoying watching the educational cartoons. He even found some of it a little funny. Although he said he couldn't really not follow the storylines of it, as it was too fast for him. He couldn't really understand the story, the narration, and what it was about. Well, he hadn't seen it up to that point, hadn't been following the series either. He thought the voices and the graphics were really interesting, were great, and the children's attempts to do the voices were funny too. He had said so, at least, to them, hoping that it would be a compliment to them, even if some of their voices were a little silly, a little loud, and a little too out there for him. Still, they were having fun doing it, and perhaps learning a little. He wasn't sure if they were learning that much, really. He gave the nice, what he thought was a compliment about their show. And they laughed and agreed. But it was only a chapter of the story, they said. He'd not seen all the earlier episodes of it. He'd need to watch the earlier ones to really know what it was about. And, smiling wearily, the older visitor had said, yes, perhaps if time permitted, he would like to see much more of it. And when he felt more awake and alert and more able to focus on it, yes, he said he'd love to, when he could give it the attention it really needed. Escaping their room, having spent a small time with them, he then went to the neighbour's kitchen, where they were busy there chatting away at the kitchen table, where he found the eldest daughter, who was stood around preparing the dinner. The mum was away picking up Aunt Taurine, one of the many aunts who visited regularly to the house. She was also the Aunt Tor, for short, known to the children. They were, of course, the nieces and nephews that she'd adopted, and one of them, the older niece, was busy away, cooking in the kitchen the Aunt Tor's favourite meal, from the instructions that the mother had left behind. The elder flower, in the room with them, was sat at the table, and he asked if he could help them preparing the table, perhaps to do something useful, whilst able to. The eldest daughter looked over, a little confused. Prepare it to do what? She asked, and he laughed back, giving a strange look, as if the suggestion had been at some bizarre act. Well, I meant for dinner. I didn't mean to make the table do anything, laughed the older man. I could lay the table for you, he suggested. And the younger woman had said no, saying it wasn't necessary, because when they had a larger gathering for the extended family, with visiting aunts and uncles joining them, they always had a party meal in the lounge, for a show meal. That was a dance meal in the lounge, not the kitchen, so they didn't need the kitchen table. They could just hold the dinner plates in their hands, if needs be. They had a party meal they always would eat in the lounge, she said, informally, because it was just more relaxing that way for all of them. And there was more room there too. She said it as if it was obvious, as if why had he needed to ask? Surprised the mother hadn't told her, perhaps. The older man was surprised at this, said he heard it was being described by the mother as just a small dinner party, had no idea there would be many others invited, and just didn't know that it would be a larger gathering. The younger woman said, no, it was a larger gathering because there would also be others. It was larger because that room, it was a much larger room to host it within, much larger than the kitchen diner they had. It was a relatively larger lounge to accommodate all of the friends of the family and the aunties visiting of the family too. Gosh, said the older man. Well, how big is this Aunt Tora that she's bringing so many staff with her then? He'd attempted some sort of joke, but the young woman just stared at him, not sure what to make of his response. The young woman returned a cold stare at his attempted humour, then gave a little brief smile, telling him that they were all inviting a friend to dinner, in fact, and that it wasn't just Aunt Tora alone that was visiting, that all of the others would have their visitor friends as well. And the elderly man appeared a little puzzled at this, watching her mixing food at the cooker, stirring away at the pots, adding a sprinkling of ingredient here and there. And he asked her, all of whom? Or all of who? Sorry, all of the children. And the young lady looked back at him. No, no, all of the adults. We'll all be inviting a friend along too, she replied. And the elderly man laughed. Aha! Nodding along to her now. So you and your older brothers, you're inviting friends too, now understanding. Yes, said the older woman. And Mum is too, stated the young lady. Well, she's picking up Aunt Tora, isn't she? Asked the elderly man, sitting at the empty table now. How would they eat in the lounge? He wondered, balancing plates in one hand, eating with the other, he wondered. Oh, she's bringing her friend along, said the young lady, still busying around with the pots and pans, grabbing hold of different salt and pepper shakers. Oh, I see. Your mum's inviting a friend along too, said the older man, finally getting it. Someone else, mused the older man, as if to himself also. So she's bringing two friends, now clarified the older man, observing. One friend and her sister, said the younger woman, busying herself still around the oven work desk. As if the elderly man should have remembered that from earlier somehow. From the family films that he watched of her. He'd forgotten already. They were like sisters, and therefore the remaining aunt visiting was a sister, not just her friend. He didn't know how often they visited, though, and there were calendars with scheduled dates of all the different visits and all when the visitors would turn up. He could look at that calendar with all the programmed visitors within it. That's what the young woman told him. It had dates of all the arranged visits, she said, going over to the table, then pushing a button on her projector machine, strapped around her wrist. It projected out onto the nearby wall, nearby the kitchen table, where the elderly man was sat, projecting out a digital calendar. On the calendar's image projected out, it showed a whole sequence around a whole big circle, showing all the different symbols, squares, circles, triangles, rectangles, that seemed to indicate all the different visitors that would occur at different hours, times of the day and weeks. All programmed in different visitors, apparently. Those were the different aunts that would visit, and also the different friends of the family, and even some of the acquaintance visitors too, explained the young woman to him, pointing at some of the different markers and showing what some of the different things indicated. There were also the visits of different classmates for some of the school children, when they had some of the show classes at home, and some of the colleagues of the mother they would visit very occasionally too, and one of her managers that would visit for the occasional review as well of the home comforter agency the older woman had worked for, the mother. The dance coach there was also that visited, but the dance coach didn't visit anymore that often because he wasn't needed. Only a few dance clients that did very occasionally, just to chat about some of the dance shows and to watch the dance shows together with the mother. The young woman had explained all of this to the older visitor, who was himself quite bewildered by it all and felt that it was a very much structured performance. He had no idea that there was such a widespread program that they relied and used. And he looked at it almost overwhelmed, but also a little impressed by it too. What were the long series of pictures? And each day had multiple different symbols for different hours of the day, the different programmed in visits of the different visitors. They must have meant, of course, presumed the older man, but not seeing all the different images because she only scanned in a few of them, perhaps just a few that he would need to see, those that he might become a little acquainted with. You don't need to remember all of those because there's the calendar. It remembers it all for you, said the younger woman, looking at his puzzled face, as if he would be expected to remember it all, as he was staring at the projected images and the vast amount of different symbols that appeared and vanished as she pushed the motion sensor to scroll through all the different revolving symbols that shot through, flickering over the kitchen wall before them. There's a reminder on the hour for who will visit an hour before, just so that everyone knows, just to get ready, said the younger woman, fluffing about the place still. She had dust and debris from the kitchen preparation still dusted down her apron. She said all this, busily stretching around the older man, removing items from the kitchen table he was sat beside, so that it was clearer for the visitors. And the elderly man had then asked her, well, what good is the alarm if it's an hour before the arrival? Well, why an hour before? Well, that's just the last alarm, the young woman explained to him. Oh, the door, just the preparation alarm, she explained. Um, then there's the final alarm that opens the doors, gives you 5 minutes warning, just so that give you a chance to clean up in case you'd forgotten, missed the hour alarm. Oh, she went on to explain that sometimes there were pre-programmed alarms, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, or 2 hours before the actual visits, depending on the nature and the need of the visit itself. But all that could be found out about if he looked into it more. He nodded along and looked at the digital calendar before she flicked her wrist, and the whole image of the different symbols vanished and disappeared, and the wall next to them in the kitchen went back to being the blank screen that it had been before. There's an alarm an hour before most of the visits, just to give us time, to prepare, to know it's coming up soon, said the young woman, just in way of explaining. To give you time for what? Asked the older man, but curious about why you would need so much time before a visit. Why she was telling him all this too, he was worried about. Was he expected to be some sort of doorman, or to welcome people into the house, introduce them to each other in the house, to open the doors on the hourly alarm call, or to play some part in some cleaning show, perhaps? Those had been discussed to him before. Perhaps the hourly alarms before would be to give them sufficient time to do the cleaning shows in preparation. Perhaps she was explaining it in hint at some work that would be done in preparation for the social visits that he was in a house to participate within. Well, it's just nice to know who's turning up when, and sometimes it's useful to know because, yes, you've got to sort of prepare, have the right equipment, get the place looking right, and everything. Well, said the young woman, explaining to him, but rushing back to the oven too, where one of the saucepans was bubbling over a little. She turned down the heat a little, adjusting it, focusing back on the cooking a little. That was okay up till then, left unattended, and now she was having to focus more on. The vegetables had been boiling away in the hot saucepans. The room itself was also getting steamy and hotter. She wanted to open the windows a little. Unless you don't mind just strangers just turning up whenever, unexpected, said the younger woman. It's just good to know when someone's turning up, even if it's someone else's visitor. claimed the younger woman. Now the actual bubbling hot water was being reduced and was going down in the saucepan that she'd reduced the heat upon. "Unless you don't mind those strangers turning up," she said to him again. "Well, you wouldn't invite strangers into your mum's house, surely," said the older man, thinking it over. "No strangers to you, I meant," laughed the younger woman. "I know nearly all of my brother and sister friends, and mum friends too," smiled the young woman, now finishing the cooking and leaving it a little, and she could return to the older man, joining the older man once more at the table, where she sat up there with him. "Oh, and the aunties, of course. But I know when they're going to visit, too. I have a lot of aunties," said the younger woman, as if they had all left long ago, following a long, awkward silence, the older man not sure what to ask of her, not wanting to distract her from her cooking if she didn't need her attention any more. "Well, it will be nice to meet some of your friends, and some of the aunts, too," said the older man. "Their videos are really funny, if you get a chance to see some of them. Well, not always, the public ones, I mean," said the young woman. She confided in him. "In what ways are they nice? Or what ways aren't they nice?" said the older man. "Well, I mean, like, sometimes they're a little bit creepy. I mean, some of my brother's films, they can be a bit rude, a bit boisterous. When they get chatting too much, that's just them, though. They just get, when they drink too much, they just talk rude. Some of their shows are just too much. I don't like them, really," confided the younger woman. Some of your younger brothers?" asked the older man, not imagining that of the polite younger brother, the polite younger student, the ones that he talked to earlier at the family dinners. He couldn't imagine that of them, from their polite talks. "Don't watch their friends talk, their drunk friends' shows. Just don't watch their friends so much, please. The older children watch them, but I don't like to. They're rude," said the younger woman. "Your older brother's friends, they're rude," tried to clarify the older man. "To you? Or your mother?" "No, they're rude about themselves," said the young woman, thinking it over. "They're rude about everyone. When they're drinking, get carried away, they just are rude about everything. Sometimes it's just like, it's funny sometimes. Sometimes it's just stupid, and it's just stupid humor. And they laugh about stuff that's not even funny, serious stuff. Now, not me or mum or family stuff, but just anything. They laugh about everyone and themselves. They're just stupid when they're drunk too much," the younger woman had complained to the older man. "Well, don't watch them. If it's too stupid, or they're drunk and they're mucking around, don't watch them. Don't listen to them when they're like that," advised the older man to her, now a little concerned about the nature of what these shows could involve, unsure, having never seen them yet, and only known them from being polite to talk to and well-mannered. "It's them. They are trying to watch us. When they're drunken and they're just mucking around, they are actually talking and trying to involve others. They knock on my door, shout my name, call at me when they're in the middle of the show. I don't want to be involved with it. I just don't respond. I don't get into it. I don't get drawn into any of it. I don't respond to them, but they always are trying to shout. If it's not me, it's others. So I just don't like them involving the younger children, even though they just do it for fun. It's just meant for fun, but I don't like them involving anyone when they're like that," complained the younger woman again. The older man had asked her whether they did that often, involving the younger children in shows that was really irresponsible, when they were too drunk, when they were too or high on whatever it was. And she said no, they never did it around her, nor around the other childminders, certainly not when mother was around either. Never got the chance to, because the rest of them were always looking out for the younger children. But they were just thoughtless, reckless, when they drunk too much, even though they were just having fun. And they didn't really see that it really was a harm to anyone. They're just mucking around when they're like that. They shouldn't be doing any films like that, complained the younger woman. "Well, it's their fault if they do it. They just laugh and they act stupid. Laugh like hyenas sometimes, she said about them, as if they were just animals sometimes, she felt, when they were too wild and drunk and untamed. They laugh at you, though? Is it at you they are doing this? Asked the concerned father figure. But they're so stupid and drunk. They're so strunk they don't know what they're doing it at. Yes, they do it to me if I'm around them. They do it to anyone, declared the younger woman, because they're too drunk when they're laughing and in that stupid mood too much. I have to deal it when I'm left behind. The childminders don't like to do it either, or the aunties. No wonder Mum doesn't like to leave people with them, complained the younger girl. I have to deal with it with all the visitors alone. How can I if I'm busy doing the housework? She complained to the older man. The younger woman, looking down a little, was now lit with some ploy. Was she playing the victim, though? Maybe he would inherit this entertaining role that she was so weary of. He just was not concerned. He was not sure, really, why she was going on about this, what she was really saying to him. I had no idea there were so many visitors, or so often. I didn't know that their shows were like that, or that they weren't being looked after properly, moaned the older man, now puzzling over this long list of complaints, scanning through and looking at a digital calendar that the woman was showing him. There was a long list of the programme visits, the ones that had happened recently. You saw the film earlier, said the woman. You saw what happened and what some of the visitors did. They were shocked too, weren't they? She asked him. Yes, yes, admitted the older man. I know, but I think maybe they were just trying to have fun. It was just a jest that got a little out of hand. Just reckless, a little thoughtless. Tried to explain the older man, as if perhaps in some defence, concerned now for the younger student friends that he'd befriended, but not knowing the true extent of where their behaviour might have gone to. Well, that was the most recent chapter, that's all, said the younger woman. This is only the next potential chapter, said the young woman, pointing now to the calendar of the programmed in images of the week or two ahead. Just a long list of conveyor belt of little images, different combination and numbers of them, all different combinations on the days ahead, all programmed in. They both stared ahead at the projected images on the kitchen wall. I mean, it can always be edited. If people cancel or rearrange visits, of course, then they can be removed from the diary automatically, said the younger woman, explaining. There were people that were left in some time. Were people that left them in some time, a time of argument, in the film, were they perhaps edited out? The older visitor had later wondered. Because there was not much talk about those people that, although had featured in the film, had had some argument, just a brief mention of it, but no dwelling on it, or no questioning or deeper explanation of it. But still he didn't think to ask about those, and whether those visits still appeared as programmed in on the calendars. The older man didn't really want to get into discussing that, not when there would be other visitors entertaining at the house either. The older man visitor had wondered it all, though. Then he did remember there were mention of some of the argumenters during the discussion when they had talked about other visitors to the house. They're the ex-poets and the ex-dancers that were discussed. Wasn't there even an ex-aunt, or one of the strange aunts, that had become estranged at some point? The ex-aunt and the ex-poet and the ex-dancer too. The ones that had been in the family visitors video, but had been edited out of the public shows. But he hadn't known the reasons for those yet. Well, it's nice to have some people in your chapters, even if you don't get to stay in contact with all of them, I suppose, had said the older man, trying to sum up, and not wanting to dwell on the argumentative characters, for whatever reason, had now stopped their visits. How can you have a story without characters? Asked the young woman, thinking about it. You can have a story about one person, couldn't you? told about or just by one person, or just told for one person by another, explained the older man, a little defensive. Aye, but it would be very boring. Who would they talk to? Just a show about someone talking to themselves? Asked the younger woman, sat at the kitchen table still, and unsure about this. Well, they could talk to people outside of the story, an outside audience, perhaps. Or talking to people in their past, talking to imaginary people, perhaps, speculated the man. Or they could be talking to outsiders. It could just be a man meeting himself, talking aloud, thinking aloud about different issues, not just talking to himself, listening to himself, reasoning with himself too. Tried to explain the older man, perhaps as his own way of defence. Well, it sounds a bit weird to me, said the younger woman, and not as good as talking with other people. And she searched for a word that wasn't too rude. It sounds a bit lonely, she said. No, it's not just lonely, the older man had said. Yes, it can be, but not all the time. As if she'd provoked some annoyance or some upset within him. Lonely are the characters, he said after a time, without any stories. It would be lonely if you had no story that you were part of in life, explained the older man. Not the story without the characters. What if it's the story that's familiar and not the characters themselves? He questioned. This the older man tried to reason to her. The younger lady thought of the advice of her mother to become and to be aware of the stranger's logic sometimes when he went too far. Uh, I think you need to have characters to make a story work. Otherwise, there is no story without different characters, interacting together, returned the younger woman. She said this to him, at least trying to be kind. You need characters to make a story work, she said.